Welcome to our first Math 8 video. So before I get into order of operations and GEMDAS, I just want to talk about why we're doing it through videos and really what you should be writing while I'm talking. So the big advantage of doing this through videos is that you can pause and rewind and rewatch whatever you didn't understand, or just pause to have time to copy down whatever you need to copy down. You can also try problems before I do it and then see if you can do this without my help. I'm perfectly okay with that as long as you're getting things right, and if you get things wrong, then you go back and watch the video. You should be writing down anything that I write down. Anything that I write down on the screen, you should be copying down onto your set of notes. The first topic we're going to talk about is the order of operations. Basically, how we have to solve every single problem. The order is really based off of multiplication being repeated addition, and then exponents being repeated multiplication, but we're not going to get too much into that. Really, we just want to talk about how you have to attack each problem. And basically, you can use GEMDAS as a checklist. You might have learned this as PEMDAS. It can be changed to GEMDAS because we need to include other grouping symbols. So it started out as PEMDAS because it was just the parentheses. That's the first one you see there. And then we add brackets, which is basically the exact same thing as parentheses, and absolute value, which is just two lines on either side of a number or an expression inside of there. And then a square root symbol, which is really actually an exponent, but we're going to talk about it as a grouping symbol, because we really need to do everything inside of there first. The absolute value changes anything inside of it into a positive. After you do everything inside of it, after you simplify everything in there, it changes it to a positive. The square root is actually a very specific operation that we'll get into more later. It's on your calculator for now. But it's basically figuring out what number times itself would give you that number. The bracket and parentheses both can act as multiplication also when there's a number right in front of it. Our next operation is exponents, which you see a couple examples of here. Actually, all of those are very different there with a negative exponent. This 2 on the inside of parentheses versus a 2 on the outside of the parentheses. Actually, here it doesn't make so much of a difference, but if we're dealing with negative numbers, it will. Our next two operations are multiplication and division. The reason those two come together is because they're kind of on the same level. Neither one of them is kind of more powerful than the other one. Neither one of them comes first. You just go from left to right. When those are the only operations left, you just work from left to right. Kind of the same thing as addition and subtraction. That's why those are grouped also. You can see multiplication in three different ways that we're going to see this year. With a dot in between the numbers. With an x, that's not as common anymore because now we're going to see the x used as a variable more often. And you could also see a number outside of a parentheses. That also means multiplication. Division we'll see in two different ways, with a division symbol and with a fraction bar. That also means division. So we also have addition and subtraction. And like I said before, when it's just those operations, those two pairs of operations, multiplication and division, or addition and subtraction, you'll work that left to right. That's actually exactly what we see on this first example. We have subtraction, addition, another addition, another subtraction. It's just addition and subtraction, so we really just work that left to right. So the directions say here which operation comes first, but we're going to solve these because these are kind of simpler examples that will eventually build into tougher ones later. Alright, so our first operation is going to be that subtraction where we combine 4 and minus 9. That would give us negative 5. Nothing else changes. We'll just rewrite plus 6, plus 10, minus 7. We're still going to work this left to right. Our next operation is this addition. We add those two together, and it combines to 1, negative 5 plus 6, plus 10, minus 7. Still working this left to right. That is going to give us 11 minus 7, and our final answer has to be 4. So the next one we have our multiplication first, and then addition, and division, and another addition. So we're going to start with either multiplication or division. We have the multiplication out in front, so we're going to start with that and combine those to 60. Not change anything else. After that, we're going to do the division because we only have addition left, so that would give us 0.5. It's 5 divided by 10. And then we're going to add straight across. That's 72.5. On the third one, we're going to start with this division in the middle because we have a division and multiplication. Those have to come before this addition. That's actually going to be the last thing. But we know when we have those two, we're going to work from left to right. So we're going to start with that. That gives us 4 in the middle. Then we're going to do the multiplication. That would give us 48. That's 4 times 12. And we would add those two together. And of course, I'm missing the top of my 5. but there it is. And that gives us 52. Alright, the last one, we're going to start inside this grouping symbol, inside the parentheses. 3 times 4, that would give us 12. And then really we're just going to do that subtraction. That's the only step that's left, which would give us negative 8. Before we get into trickier order of operations problems, we have to talk about exponent rules, and especially how they interact with parentheses, and really the difference between when there are parentheses and when there's no parentheses. So when we're squaring, when you're squaring a number, when you have an exponent of 2, and it's on a set of parentheses, your answer will be a positive number. That is only when you're squaring a number, not when you're cubing a number. Squaring a number means you're multiplying it by itself 2 times. So a negative times a negative would give you a positive. Cubing a number, like this, negative 2 cubed, means you're multiplying a negative times a negative times a negative, which would actually change it back to a negative 8 there. So in this first example, negative 3 squared in parentheses, that's negative 3 times negative 3, which would give us a positive 9. This is what the calculator always thinks you're doing. If you type in negative 3 and then you hit the squared button, it thinks you're putting that number in parentheses and then squaring it. So on the next one, you could just type it into the calculator as negative 10 squared, or negative 10 times negative 10. Either way, that gives you a positive 100. That's different from no parentheses, which the calculator really doesn't understand. It's thinking that the negative is a part of the number being squared. Here with no parentheses, actually this negative is kind of acting like a minus sign. So in order of operations, it would actually come after the exponent. So you're squaring the 6, just the 6, not taking the negative with it. It's not a negative times a negative. It's really just squaring the 6, a positive 6, and then changing that answer to a negative. It's taking the opposite of this 6 squared number, which would give us negative 36. So anytime we have no parentheses, those answers are always going to be negative because the negative sign really doesn't get canceled out by that squaring. On that next example, it's negative 2 squared. Really, it's 2 times 2 and then change to a negative, so that's negative 4. We also need to talk about negative exponents. And a negative exponent basically just changes a number into a fraction form of that number. If we want to change that into a positive exponent, let's look at this first example, 4 to the negative third. If we change that into a positive exponent, that changes into a fraction 1 over 4 to the third, which is 1 over 64, because 4 times 4 times 4 is just 64. And that's really just a decimal. That is the decimal 0.0156, and you can find that by doing 1 divided by 64. It's always going to give us a decimal that's less than 1 when we use a negative exponent, because it really is the same as 1 over that as a positive exponent. The easier way to see this, much easier way to see this, is just by doing this in the calculator. Really, you can hit the keystrokes that I'm showing here, 5, and then the y to the x button. That's saying I'm going to put in whatever exponent I want next. 5 with an exponent of 2, and then we change it to a negative, so negative 2. And it will give you the answer of 0.04. On letter C, we're raising 2 to the negative 4th power. So again, we can do that in the calculator. We can hit 2, and then y to the x, and then 4, and change that to a negative, and that gives us this decimal, 0.0625. So those are both going to be useful, really understanding how exponents interact with parentheses and how negative exponents work. Those are both going to be useful in these more difficult order of operations problems. All right, so I'm going to ask that you try as many of these on your own as you feel comfortable with. Go up to number 8 if you need to. I'm going to explain the first 4 in the video. Obviously, you can ask us in person if you need help.